In this lecture, you are going to learn about the 7 Years' War and the Acadian Expulsion. A few years after the Treaty of Utrecht was signed, finalizing the War of Spanish Succession in 1713, there will be yet another European war regarding a contested throne called the War for Austrian Succession that took place between 1740 and 1748. The war was fought over the issue of Maria Theresa's succession to the Habsburg monarchy. The war ended with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748, whereby Maria Theresa was confirmed as Archduchess of Austria and Queen of Hungary, but Prussia retained control of Silesia. However, the underlying issues were not resolved, and combined with the political upheaval in Europe, we will see soon yet another war between these European powers called the 7 Years' War. The rise of England intensified European rivalries for control of Atlantic trade. Commercial struggles for control over colonies and sea lanes replaced earlier religious and territorial struggles. European powers accordingly built large navies to protect these resources. It is not surprising then that the 7 Years' War will be a war that will be fought all over the world. The 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War, was a combination of European rivalries fought in the Americas, Europe, and India. In North America, the British Empire was the clear winner of the 7 Years' War, while France and Spain will lose more territories. Unfortunately, the ones that will lose the most in this war will be indigenous peoples everywhere. The war will also mark the British domination of North America, but it will come at a heavy price. Its high expense will lay the foundation for conflict between the British and its American colonists that will lead to the American Revolution. As mentioned before, the 7 Years' War has been brewing for a while, with tensions among Europeans running high after years of warfare with one another. The Americas will prove to be a contested battlefield for resources that will raise the tensions even higher. The tensions will reach a boiling point in the French and English contested territory of the Ohio River Valley. French fur traders had a long-term alliance with indigenous groups in the Ohio country. But in the 1740s, Pennsylvanian land speculators began to infringe on the territory. A group of Virginians formed the Ohio Company and began to advance on the same land. French soldiers advanced into native territory in the Ohio country and built a series of forts, hoping to create a western barrier to British American expansion. In 1753, however, Robert Dinwiddie, Virginia's royal governor, sent George Washington as a messenger to warn the French that they were the ones trespassing on Virginian land. led by George Washington, a Virginian party set out in 1753 to request that the French relinquish their position in the Ohio Valley. However, the result was an intensified French activity in the region. The following year, Washington returned once again under the orders from Virginia's governor. Dinwiddie appointed the young Washington to lead a small military expedition west to assert Virginia's claim and chase the French away, but without attacking them. But things did not turn out as expected. Washington returned with 160 armed Virginians, aided by native allies of the Mingo tribe. A detachment of some of Washington's men, led by Mingo chief Tana Garrison, surprised French soldiers in the woods. Who fired first was in dispute, but the resulting skirmish led to 14 French deaths. The French response, along with several of their native allies, was to pursue and capture Washington at Fort Necessity before releasing him with a clear message for Virginia. The Ohio Valley was beyond their grasp. But British American population and economic growth by 1754 had reached a point where many of the largest colonies felt friction with New France. Georgia in the south was pinched between Florida and Louisiana. Virginia was both powerful and rich, as well as increasingly cramped on the tidewater side of the Appalachians. New York's ambitions for the West, along with those of Pennsylvania, pulled it into the conflict in the Ohio. New England and Nova Scotia continued to wrestle with Wabanaki Confederacy attacks and uncertainty about the Acadians and the future of Louisbourg. So these tensions between the colonists meant that neither side was going to give up easy. By 1755, Washington's frontier skirmish had turned into a major war, the 7 Years' War. The American name for the war was the French and Indian War, which reflects their perception that this was a battle against two old foes, New France and the natives. Although the British outnumbered the French, in the beginning of the war, the French certainly had the upper hand. For example, one of the first attacks by French and native forces was an ambush of British troops near Fort Duquesne, killing nearly 1,000 British soldiers for the next 2 years. The British stumbled badly on the American front. Meanwhile, in British-controlled Nova Scotia, things were about to turn really bad for the Acadians. With the French and the British at war again, the Acadians were stuck in the middle. And unfortunately, the war will be used as an excuse to finally expel them from their land. In meetings with the Acadians in July 1755 in Halifax, Governor Charles Lawrence pressed the delegates to take an unqualified oath of allegiance to Britain. When they refused, he imprisoned them and gave the fateful order for deportation. Lawrence had strong support in his council from recent immigrants from New England who coveted Acadian lands. Traders from Boston frequently expressed wonder that an alien people were allowed to possess such fine lands in the British colony. On Friday, September 5, 1755, Colonel John Winslow ordered that all males aged 10 years and up in the area were to gather in Grand Prix Church for an important message from His Excellency Charles Lawrence, the Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia. The decree stated in part that your land and tenements, cattle of all kinds, and livestock of all sorts are forfeit to the crown with all other your effects, saving your money and household goods, and you yourselves to be removed from this province. Essentially expelling the Acadians from their own land. Between 1755 and 1763, approximately 10,000 Acadians were deported from their homeland. They were shipped to many points around the Atlantic. Large numbers landed in English colonies, others in France or the Caribbean. Thousands died of disease or starvation in squalid conditions on board ships. Meanwhile, from 1754 to 1757, the war continued, mostly in favor of New France. For the first 2 years, it was exclusively a colonial affair, but with the outbreak of war in Europe in 1756, new strategies emerged. The British under Prime Minister William Pitt believed they could tie up French armies in Europe and make use of their superior navy to harass the colonies of France abroad. The climatic battle of the conflict took place on September 12, 1759. After laying siege to the city of Quebec for 3 months, 5,000 British regulars sailed past the city and secretly scaled the cliffs leading to the Plains of Abraham, west of the city. Under cover of darkness, the French moved quickly to repel the surprise attack, but within 15 minutes, the battle was decided. By 1760, the French had been expelled from Canada, and by 1763, all of France's allies in Europe had either made a separate peace with Prussia or had been defeated. In addition, Spanish attempts to aid France in the Americas had failed, and France also suffered defeats against British forces in India. The British will win the war. The complex peace negotiations reorganized the map of North America. The British retained control of the eastern half of North America and gained control of Canada. French territory west of the Mississippi River, including New Orleans, was transferred to Spain. The war will also sour the relationship between the British and their colonial subjects in North America. England's version of the victory of 1763 awarded all credit to the British Army and blamed colonists for prolonging the war by engaging in illegal trade with the French. On the other hand, the colonists claimed that they had turned out in great force but had been relegated to grunt work by arrogant British military leaders. The enormous expense of the war, caused by Pitt's no-holds-barred military strategy, casted another huge shadow over the victory. One that will have lasting consequences and will lead to a revolution. That is all for now. Please stay tuned for the next video lecture.